Vamos fechar com chave de ouro, penso eu, fora de Portugal, mas para aprendermos. Vamos agora ouvir António Lopes, especialista em design de currículo docente, formador e investigador, que tem feito pesquisa na área da ecojustiça e literacia mediática, fundador da teoria Literacia dos Ecomédia e criador do site ecomedialiteracy.org, professor e presidente do Departamento de Comunicação e Estudos de Média da Universidade John Cabot, em Roma, Itália.
Eu vou traduzir, vou colocar a tradução em português daquilo que o António vai dizer em inglês. Vou tentar colocar slide a slide. Quem quiser seguir em português ouvindo o António e vendo os slides, basta abrir o chat. Está bem? Se conseguirem acompanhar o inglês, não precisam de abrir o chat e, portanto, estão à vontade. De qualquer modo, aqui, tu vais abrir o chat? Pronto.
O chat está ativo para eles visualizarem?
Está ativo, pronto. So now it's okay, Antonio. I apologize for this moment, and please, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. And thank you for inviting me to present at to such a wonderful group of educators and journalists. And thanks to Vitor Tomé for inviting me to speak to such a prestigious audience. I'm Antonio Lopez. I'm a professor of communications and media studies at John Cabot University in Rome. And my research focus is bridging media literacy and climate justice. As the title of this talk suggests, I'm referring to the smash Netflix film about the climate emergency, which satirizes the inability of our society to mobilize in the face of a climate crisis. In particular, the film takes aim at the media. As media educators and journalists, I want to focus on our role in addressing the climate emergency. I apologize in advance for mostly using examples from North American media. And I'm sorry, I don't speak Portuguese, but I love your language. And hopefully you can find parallels in your own media environment in the examples that I give. I have no doubt that I'm speaking to the choir. No one here needs to be convinced that we are in a climate emergency. But sometimes we need to be reminded of how serious it is. This graphic, a form of visual media, speaks more than 1,000 words. And this also points to how important media will be for communicating this problem. As a provocation, I start with a rhetorical question. What do these two images have in common? During the same week as the 94th Academy Awards in 2022, the Arctic reached +10 degrees Celsius and Antarctica +21 degrees Celsius above normal temperatures. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change also released its most dire report. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated, "Today's IPCC report is an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership." He said it's code red for the climate. In particular, this is the first IPCC report that actually addresses specifically problems with the media. So they also cite the importance of misinformation. So I'm going to quote the report. "Addressing these risks have been made more urgent by delays due to misinformation about climate science that has sowed uncertainty and impeded recognition of risk. Despite scientific certainty of the anthropogenic influence on climate change, misinformation and politicization of climate change science has created polarization in public and policy domains in North America, particularly in the US, limiting climate action." This is also the first IPCC report to mention education. and this is a very important quote, changing from a commercialized, individualized entrepreneurial training model to an education cognizant of planetary health and human well-being can accelerate climate change awareness and action. So they're well aware of the importance that education plays for future action. Unfortunately, climate and environmental issues have been a low priority in media literacy, especially in North America. In a 2019 snapshot of media literacy education in the US, the National Association of Media Literacy Education showed that only 6.6 of topics in media literacy programs in the United States addressed eco-media literacy or sustainability. The top 3 topics were information literacy, agenda bias, and news literacy. So how can we address this urgency in our own work? Over the past 20 years, I have been researching and developing a framework to bridge media literacy with eco-justice called eco-media literacy. The starting point is using the term eco-media to acknowledge that media are part of and about the environment. Most media literacy only addresses the content of media, but not their materiality. Eco-media literacy combines the insights coming out of eco-media studies, environmental communication, and environmental humanities. Because most are unfamiliar with how media and the environment are connected, I want to give a brief overview using the framework of the eco-media mind footprint. The eco-media mindprint has to do with how media circulate discourses, information, and ideology about the environment and climate. Public policy is impacted by how environmental issues are framed in the media. Beliefs about the system how the system should function are also reinforced through news, popular culture, and advertising. Consumerism, which is one of the main root causes of the climate crisis, is promoted through marketing and is the primary business model of media. Subtly and implicitly, media do ideological work to define the boundaries between humans and the environment. In this ad example, the environment is transformed into a commodity. The ad reinforces the enclosure of the commons by encouraging the privatization of water through promoting bottled water. It also normalizes plastic use and waste. In the US, studies show over and over again that the climate crisis is barely covered by the news media, which is a form of climate silence. And please forgive me again for not sharing with you research related to European or Portuguese media, but I imagine the situation is somewhat similar, but probably slightly better. Most importantly, and a big focus of my research over the past year, is the problem of climate disinformation. The fossil fuel industry strategy is to confuse and to conquer by creating an epistemological crisis where no one knows what to believe or what is real. But media also have a positive effect. They can help coordinate social action and promote environmental values and empathy. We need climate storytellers. The ecological footprint exists along the commodity chain of production. It starts with the mining of rare earth minerals in countries like the Congo, which generates conflict, gender violence, exploited labor, and degrades ecosystems. Our gadgets are mostly manufactured in China, which is often referred to as the factory of the world, where worker exploitation and ecosystem contamination is widespread. At the end of our gadget's life cycle is e-waste. Only 13% of electronics get recycled, and when they're mostly exported to low-income countries like Ghana, China, and India, where precious metals are extracted through highly toxic processes that poison workers and ecosystems. There's also the problem of CO2 from our data cloud, a network of server farms all over the world that primarily requires fossil fuel generated electricity. Currently, the data cloud emits as much CO2 annually as the aviation industry and is set to double in the coming years. Server farms and microchip production also require massive amounts of water. Media and technology industries depend on neo-colonial practices of extractivism. Some examples include lithium for batteries, conflict minerals such as cassiterite, wolframite, coltan, gold for our components, our gold ore for components, copper for wires, aluminum for cases, and plastics for our screens and cases. And you can see in these pictures of examples of different sites around the world where extractivism takes place. To justify the extractive process, which is highly polluting and destructive to ecosystems, low-income regions and communities of people of color are designated as sacrifice zones. Regional environments are sacrificed for the global economy. And of course, the people who live in these regions are performing a form of digital labor. They are part of populations that are considered disposable. Concurrently, the model of our economy is evolving. It's not a coincidence that the emergence of surveillance capitalism is enabling the acceleration of global warming. They do it by expanding the physical footprint of our planetary technologies, but also by affording the spread of fossil fuel propaganda, disinformation, and right-wing politics, which oppose solving the climate crisis. Current technological trends are only exacerbating the climate crisis. Artificial intelligence, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, frictionless online shopping, virtual reality, online gaming, ad tech, streaming services, and online meetings are putting more pressure on networks and driving more emissions. Given these conditions, what should we do as media educators? I obviously believe that we as media educators have an obligation to apply our knowledge and our expertise to this problem. We are obliged, in the spirit of eco-justice, to be good relatives, as the Native Americans believe, to all humans, more than humans, and future generations. Okay, now in the following section, I want to propose a way to analyze the problem of climate silence and, to propose a way to analyze the problem of climate silence in the media and disinformation, which can help us understand our role in solving the problem. Here I will apply Herman and Chomsky's propaganda model. So the first filter in Herman and Chomsky's Herman and Chomsky proposed 5 filters in their propaganda model. The first one is ownership, in particular the concentration of ownership. So private companies are primarily accountable to shareholders who also share a worldview with the same forces at the center of finance and neoliberal capitalism. The corporate media oligarchy also includes right-wing media ownership, especially in the case of News Corp, Sinclair, Clear Channel in the US, that actively undermine climate action. Google, Microsoft, and Facebook contribute to climate-denying think tanks. Social media is highly monopolized and designed to extract value from users. And as you all know, 6 media giants control 90% of what we read, watch, or listen to. The second filter is advertising, which is the primary source of income for most media. As a primary source of income, there is a dependency on consumer economy based on the fossil fuel industry. The economy of attention puts tremendous pressure on news production to be sensationalistic and to drive audiences to add content. Surveillance capitalism demands extraction and commodification of user data for behavioral targeting and advertising. In this one example, the fossil fuel industry heavily advertised and sponsored political newsletters while there were important votes going on in the US Congress on climate legislation. On the slide, you can see different examples of disinformation that were placed as advertisements. Ad tech, which is little known or understood outside the industry, but this is how disinformation generally spreads. Ad publishers distribute disinformation in the form of ads. Ad tech distributors don't make distinctions between ads and disinformation, so website publishers may not even know disinformation is part of their advertising revenue. The third filter is sourcing, or the dependency on people in power. Due to professional practices, journalists rely on governments, official sources, or people in power as sources of information. The practice of objectivity often leads to false equivalency. So, for example, if one party says the sky is blue, but if the political opposition says it's raining, rather than have a debate about whether it's raining or not, it's the journalist's job to go outside and to see what the weather is. Climate science is not an opinion or a belief, it is fact. The focus on statements by politicians like Trump, pundits who push industry-sponsored pseudoscience, and elite experts from the global north dominate the news media. Victims of climate apartheid are rarely featured in the news media. Herman and Chomsky's fourth filter is FLAC, which is the disciplining of media. The disciplining of media is maintained by pundits, online trolls, and well-organized right-wing attack machine. And I want to show you an example of how this works. So the diagram shows how the right-wing climate denial ecosystem works. Starting from left, the fossil fuel industry funnels dark money into think tanks and foundations. These organizations produce climate disinformation and train fake experts to disseminate disinformation into an influencer echo chamber, which is comprised of bloggers, politicians, and conservative media. From there, it enters into the public sphere and becomes mainstream. The last filter is anti-communism, and this model was created in the 1980s, so obviously it has had to evolve. So currently, anti-communism is now referred to as the dominant idea, or the filter is now the dominant ideology. And so in our case, the dominant ideology is neoliberal capitalism, or the fossil fuel status quo. The framing of environmentalists as anti-capitalist, anti-human, or radicals can invoke the same kind of fear that anti-communism did. Big carbon public relations has transformed the new green threat into a red threat. Here's one example of an ad that ran in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal that frames climate concerns as a threat to the status quo or to the economy. These memes were spread to represent climate activists as green fascists or as hypocrites. So this right-wing attack machine is very good at manipulating social media and speaking in the vernacular or in the language of social media by distributing memes. Christian Fuchs, who is a scholar of new media technologies, has added a sixth filter, which is entertainment and spectacle. And in his view, entertainment and spectacle displaces rational political and policy debate. These images are from the film Don't Look Up, but there are many scenes like this happening every day in news media across the world. So what can be a media literacy response? This is just a few ideas that many of us can use our collective intelligence to find additional ways to address this. This is a list that I came up with. information and news literacy for detecting fake news, but focused specifically on fake news. News literacy for detecting bias and recognizing the 5 filters of the propaganda model. Critical media literacy skills for detecting and reading greenwashing and false climate solutions like net zero. Science literacy for critically engaging climate claims. Green citizenship to work on media reforms that limit the power of private media monopolies and support public funding for climate and eco-justice journalism. Train students in journalism and digital storytelling for climate action, and move beyond a model of responsibilization, which means putting the blame on individuals and focusing on system change. So, returning to my original example, what SLAP should we pay attention to? Take a minute to reflect on the state of our climate, oceans, forests, soil, animals and insect extinction, and plastics in our bodies. The SLAP we need to pay attention to is one we are getting from the climate surrounding us. So it's time for us, like they say in the movie, to look up. And I just want to close by saying that I have created a website called ecomedialiteracy.org, which is meant to help media educators find resources, and it's a work in progress. I've just created it recently, so I'm looking for collaborators. So please feel free to contact me if you want to help contribute to the site and to make it usable for everyone across the world. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, dear Antonio. I don't know if you have any questions from the audience or the online audience. Can use the chat here in the I apologize for that. Here in the room. So far we don't have any questions, but I would like to ask you something, if you don't mind. How can we put this in practice in schools or in classrooms?
I think the strategy has to be small at the beginning, because I think a lot of people are just going to have to learn new material. And my suggestion is to take a media literacy lesson that you already have, let's say about fake news, but then use climate fake news as the example that you're going to discuss in class, or to bring in, anytime you have an example that you're teaching in class, whether it's advertising or popular culture, to start incorporating environmental themes. Take an example like I showed you of a bottled water ad, and teach them how to deconstruct those ads, but with an eye towards the environment. Of course, we're going to have to change our policies in our education systems to get broader changes, but as far as the individual teachers, start small, start with one lesson here and there. And also, please feel free to use the website that I'm developing to find examples that you can use.
Thank you, Antonio. So to summarize what Antonio has just said, he suggests we can use the site because there are a lot of different examples that we can use in our pedagogical practice. And he also suggests that we can use other examples related with climate change when we are developing media literacy activities.
I would also suggest,
okay. Can I translate it in Portuguese? It's okay?
Yes, one other comment. One other comment. An organization like yours could also do professional development so that teachers can get trained on how to teach environmental issues in their curriculum.
Ok. No fundo, usarmos tudo o que tiver a ver com o clima e com a mudança climática, aproveitando aquilo que já está inserido no currículo e, portanto, aproveitando também as diferentes disciplinas, ou seja, as diferentes áreas, tal como nós já fazemos com a media literacy, sem estar focada num determinado tema, neste caso no ambiente, e depois usar então todos os exemplos e os exemplos designadamente que ele tem no website dele, e o website dele que é feito a partir de Itália. Eu depois vou partilhar e a DGE vai partilhar novamente o endereço. We will share your website address because some people is asking if you can put it on the screen. It will be great, Antonio. One more time, if you don't mind.
I'm going to do that right now. There's a QR code as well.
Ok, ele tem um código QR, portanto, se quiserem escanear o código QR ou fotografar, vocês conseguem usar. Okay, Antonio, I don't know, you can't see, but I can see, and there are a lot of people taking pictures of your QR code. Thank you very much. Ok, alguém tem mais alguma questão? Alguém tem alguma questão para colocar ao António? Okay, there are no questions, Antonio. So there are 4:38 p.m. So 39, 1 minute left. So let me just take this minute to thank you very much for your availability to cooperate with us in this second encounter of media literacy and journalism in Portugal. It was very, very important for us, and I'm sure that what you have shared with us it will be important in different classrooms in this country, and I'm sure that we'll stay in contact and stay in touch to develop different projects in Portugal. Thank you very much, Antonio.
Thank you.